How's everyone? Jay here. This video expedition is part 4 of the Expanse Earth-Mars Conflict series that will examine the first interplanetary war between the United Nations of Earth, Luna, and the Mars Congressional Republic known as the UN-MCR War. Parts 1, 2, and 3 of the series covers the 150 years of the prior Cold War confrontations between both planetary superpowers, opening with Martian independence and then the Vesta blockade into the prelude war shadow confrontation for control of the proto-molecule unfolding during seasons 1 and 2 with the in-universe timeline years of 2350 through 2351 that becomes the catalyst and directly leading into the UN-MCR war at the start of 2352 Sol. The link for the Earth-Mars Conflict series playlist will be at the end of this video and also listed down below in the description. After nearly 2 years of the proxy trade war and commerce raiding by privateer mercenary factions supported and armed by the governments of Earth and Mars spreading throughout the entire solar system, the trade network was drastically impacted by the loss of 3,000 merchant vessels making up 8% of the total transport fleet being either lost, raided, or destroyed. Outer planetary and belter factions have gained more influence in the past 2 years than the previous century combined, with over 1,000 ships retrofitted for naval combat with point defense cannons, military-grade torpedoes, and advanced defense systems throughout the various groups and tribes out of 100 factions consisting of small armadas with 5 to 20 ships each. Just over a third of the OPA factions side with the Martian Navy, a quarter support the forces of Earth, and the other 40% are independent equal opportunity raiders. In February 2352, after 2 years of the proxy commerce war and Battle of Ganymede, after formal declarations of war were decreed from both interplanetary superpowers, the United Nations Navy consisted of 2,765 naval vessels, making up 9 primary fleets and 4 secondary fleets. 553 warships comprised that of the Mars Congressional Republic Navy, maintaining 5 core fleets and 3 support fleets. The Martian ships hold the technological edge with newer and more advanced defense systems and stealth capabilities. The majority of Earth ships are older but have a significant numbers advantage by a factor of 5 to 1 with that of the Martian ships, balancing the quantity versus quality naval doctrines, placing an armed confrontation in the hands of military commanders and political decisions to determine which side will be victorious. The United Nations naval strategy and fleet order of battle is to engage in a war of attrition to dwindle Martian ship strength in a prolonged conflict where Earth's numerical advantage and large network of interplanetary infrastructure, shipyards, and production capabilities can outlast the less robust Martian economy, driving it into submission over an extended period of time. The United Nations has a system-wide network of 8 major shipyards and a dozen dock relay ports, over 3 times that of the Martian infrastructure. The UNN deployed large fleet formations designed to draw out Martian forces into pitched naval battles, with maneuvers bringing to bear overwhelming amounts of torpedoes and railgun volleys. The Mars Naval Defense Plan is to concentrate their Navy in and around the proximity of MCR-controlled space while performing hit-and-run stealth strikes with small and fast fleet elements and battle groups in conjunction and accompanied by attacks on lines of communications and fleet supply vessels. Tactically, the goal is to damage and or destroy as many UN ships as possible through asymmetrical strikes, utilizing withdrawals to avoid large-scale battles when practical. Heavily defended bases, ports, and stations are used as staging points for strategic operations and tactical missions maneuvers to mount and coordinate offensive campaigns. The overall strategic goal is to inflict large amount of losses to UN fleets in a relatively short time frame on a practical level for MCRN situational operations, making it extremely costly for Earth to conquer Martian space and creating diminishing results on manpower, resources, and morale from swift and massive casualties, breaking the United Nations' resolve to continue the war. In February 2352, Earth was near apogee orbital separations with the Jovian systems of Jupiter and Saturn increasing UNN transit burns for fleet reinforcements from the inner planets, compared to perigee position of Mars, giving MCRN ships a greater advantage in speed and logistical fleet rotations between the Jovian systems. After the Battle of Ganymede, the UNN withdrew their Jupiter fleet from the Galilean orbits to a rendezvous with 65 Fifth Fleet ships after sustaining heavy combat losses throughout Jovian orbits, leaving the MCRN in firm control of Jupiter with a large concentration of ships supported by the large naval base on Callisto. Earth Fleet Command deployed their outer-planetary 5th and Jupiter fleets for a combined offensive with the Saturn fleet on the Ring system with 370 warships to drive the MCRN from orbit and resupply Titan naval base, forcing Mars to choose between a large fleet engagement or giving up Saturn. The Phase 2 objective will be a combined assault on Jupiter with the joint inner and outer planetary forces to neutralize the Martian naval stronghold on Callisto. MCR Command would use their Saturn fleet of 50 ships as a delaying decoy action, utilizing navigational advantages and signal intelligence to deploy battle groups and stealth squadrons as quick reaction forces, performing hit-and-run strikes on UNN warships while disrupting supply lines, raiding support vessels, and recovery ships undergoing long transit burns from the inner orbits. Over the next 8 weeks, heavy fighting in the outer planets near Saturn resulted in 140 UNN ships lost or damaged in combat, with 28 MCRN ship engagement casualties. In April 2352, 250 UNN ships from 3 fleets punched through the MCRN stealth ambushes despite heavy losses, commencing the Saturn offensive as a well-executed MCRN withdrawal utilizing heavy railguns on small moons combined with a rearguard fleet action with fleet elements enabled all but 10 of the Martian ships to escape a large combined Earth naval force with hard burns towards Jupiter to regroup around the MCRN Galilean orbit strongholds. So far, fighting in the inner planets and asteroid belts have primarily revolved around commerce raiding and proxy combat engagements by Earth and Martian-supported OPA factions, to include frontline naval skirmishes due to the UN and MCR-controlled belt territorial orbits being heavily defended by home and core fleets, tracking sensors, and networks of planetary railguns based on numerous asteroid belts and both planetary homeworlds. During the first 4 months of the war, including the battles of Ganymede and Jovian system, the United Nations Navy suffered 330 ships lost, missing, or damaged, with a remaining combined fleet total of 2,515. Martian Republic naval losses consisted of 67 vessels for a total fleet of 506 ships. OPA Belter, Privateer, and Mercenary faction casualties totaled 215 armed ships and 550 merchant and trade vessels lost, raided, or disabled. With the UNN committing such a large force towards the outer planetary offensive, the MCRN deployed nearly half their fleets to defend the Jovian system and the critical naval base at Callisto. Despite Earth conceding Ceres Station to Mars, the largest trade hub in the asteroid belt, losing Jupiter would be a significant loss for the MCRN, as a quarter of their ship production capacity is produced by the Callisto shipyards. Additionally, the Galilean moons are key gateways to the outer planetary trade networks. This would isolate the Martian economy to the asteroid belt's controlled orbits and territories, and without Jupiter, Earth could prolong the conflict and blockade Mars to their corner of the solar system, slowly chipping away at MCR space until the UN's interplanetary economy could strangle Mars into submission and win by simply building more ships over a prolonged war. Additionally, in a few months, Earth's network of shipyards and repair docks will be able to cycle back into service a significant amount of naval vessels that had been damaged during the early stages of the war. Despite MCRN Command's optimistic projections in their capacity to defend and hold the Callisto shipyards and Jovian system, Mars deployed half of their stealth ballistic missile platforms to the heart of UN-controlled space as a fallback plan if Jupiter was overrun. 5 platforms with 10 planet buster missiles containing 20 nuclear warheads each were positioned around Earth and Luna for a first strike option with the capacity to overwhelm orbital defenses through salvos of 1,000 guided missiles designed to target UN command and control centers, inflicting enough damage that would allow Mars to successfully defend itself from an interplanetary nuclear response. Shortly before the Callisto offensive, Earth's Watchtower surveillance networks detected 2 of the platforms, enabling planetary railguns to destroy all 5 of the targets, but not before the 5th platform was able to launch a planet buster with 1 of the 20 nuclear warheads avoiding defense systems, detonating on an Amazonian population center, inflicting 1 million casualties. The other 5 MCRN stealth platforms were in defensive orbits around Mars, the asteroid belt, and Jupiter. Hygiea Station, operated by the Outer Planetary Alliance, was openly anti-colonial and hostile towards the United Nations prior to the Interplanetary War. When the conflict started, the station sided with Mars, becoming a major weapons and logistics hub for privateer belter factions to raid and harass Earth trade and supply routes in the belt and outer planets that inflicted significant losses to UN merchant fleets. Shortly after the Battle of Saturn, the MCRN's Second Fleet element, providing orbit security, withdrew to protect Juno Station to fill MCR patrol zones, as many ships were redeployed to defend the Jovian system, leaving only armed belter ships to protect the supply station. Earth Fleet Command exploited this shift of forces with a UN-MC drop fleet deploying a battalion of assault marines to invade and neutralize the station's operational and dock facilities through precision drop troops intended to minimize civilian casualties. The UN task fleet swept aside the armed belter ships, landing the 350 drop troops, but unbeknownst to Earth forces, 2 platoons of Martian Marines had prepared hardened defenses and armed belters on the stations, training them in basic combat arm tactics. The UN Marines had anticipated minor and uncoordinated resistance, allowing for engineers to place demolition charges, withdrawing and completing the mission in less than 24 hours. Instead, they faced heavily armed opposition with hard fighting on every level, securing only a portion of the objectives in the allotted mission window. After 72 hours of heavy fighting, UN Marines were forced to withdraw from the station as a MCRN battle group and OPA escort ships were approaching orbit. Suffering significant casualties, the UN-MC only disabled 20% of the station's critical objectives. Instead, the withdrawing UN Naval Assault Force unleashed salvos of torpedoes and railgun barrages to neutralize the military support facility, causing significant damage to the trade station's infrastructure, along with large numbers of civilian casualties. With the war now entering the decisive phase, the first 2 weeks of June 2352, Earth and Mars deployed more ships towards the Jovian system in preparation for the Battle of Jupiter, centered around Callisto shipyards and the Martian naval base that was the key to controlling the Galilean orbit. Furthermore, UNN Security Force reinforcements secured the outer planetary trade routes as MCR-backed privateer factions withdrew towards the inner asteroid belt orbits due to the sheer numerical advantage held by Earth's naval patrol ships, placing more emphasis on the MCRN maintaining control of Jupiter's economic resources and strategic networks to sustain the ever-increasing likelihood of a drawn-out conflict. On Earth, at the District of New York, the Secretary General of the United Nations was due to address the Earth-Luna Coalition Assembly with the state of interplanetary relations with the entire solar system, anticipating the dialogue's tone as both ends of the political spectrum eagerly awaited if their governmental influence had borne fruit, with rumors of a planetary nuclear exchange escalating as the war migrates towards the inner orbits. MCR officials were equally ready to dissect the Secretary General's message as a possible overtone towards negotiations or a firm resolve to continue the drums of war. After a standing ovation from some of the most influential members of the solar system, it was clear Earth would rely on military force to determine the war's outcome. After nearly 2 years of interplanetary conflict and war of attrition, the United Nations fleet capacity could field 842 warships for active frontline combat operations compared to that of 250 MCRN deployed naval vessels, decreasing Earth's previous 5-to-1 ship advantage to just over a 3-to-1 ratio of battle-capable fleet strengths. Jupiter will determine which side will secure the advantage in the future course of the war. If the MCRN can maintain control of the Callisto naval base and shipyards and successfully defend the Galilean orbits, Mars will continue to have access to the outer planets with a stronghold in the primary Jovian system. However, if the United Nations Navy can neutralize Martian access to their primary naval base at Callisto, Earth fleets will be able to drive Martian presence from the Jovian system, thus securing the outer planets and begin blockading MCR-controlled space in the asteroid belt. The UNN allocated 400 warships from the Jovian fleets of Jupiter and Saturn, and 5th and 8th fleets operating in the outer planets to attack the MCR-controlled Galilean orbits for the Jupiter offensive, converging from 3 orbit attack vectors with over 120 ships in each task force. Mars deployed 125 warships for defense, with the Saturn and Jupiter fleets defending the primary orbits, and 3rd Tactical Fleet performing a daring preemptive strike on 2 of the UNN battle armadas. The MCRN consolidated all available stealth warships from 4 fleets near Jupiter to make up 38 of the 57 3rd Fleet ships for the campaign. The Mars stealth fleet split into 2 task forces containing 4 battle groups each to intercept the UNN battle formations of 240 ships transiting towards Jupiter from Saturn. The MCRN task fleets were guided by a stealth surveillance platform with long-range tracking for precision targeting solutions on the enemy formations. The advanced stealth attacks inflicted heavy losses on the UNN fleets, destroying 65 ships and damaging 85 more until the element of surprise was lost amidst fleet-to-fleet engagements in which the Earth ships regrouped, eliminating 30 attacking ships and 4 battle groups and rendering 13 more non-mission capable, along with destroying the MCRN stealth surveillance platform, leaving only 14 surviving 3rd Fleet ships to withdraw from the battle zones. 65 of the UN naval vessels fought through the stealth ambush towards Jupiter, with 25 more remaining to assist the 85 damaged ships and defend the area, as it was common for MCRN raiders to lay in wait to attack the UNN fleet tenders and recovery ships. After the largest battle in solar system history, the UNN had 225 remaining warships for the outer Jovian offensive, with the MCRN mustering 68 for defense. The UNN Vanguard fleet of 52 ships commanded by Admiral Souther encountered the MCRN forward task force of 22 Jupiter ships led by Fleet Captain Carino on the edge of the Galilean orbits. Between Callisto and Io, a mutiny on board Earth's flagship, the Agatha King, resulted in UNN ships firing upon each other. During the melee, 150 stealth missiles were launched by a rogue UN faction from the surface of Io, armed with proto-molecule warheads targeting Mars that would render the planet uninhabitable after impact, infecting the biosphere with proto-molecule contaminants. Fred Johnson's OPA faction on Tycho Station in the asteroid belt intercepted the stealth torpedoes in transit with 30 captured UN interplanetary ballistic missiles, destroying the proto-molecule debris with multiple nuclear fusion detonations sterilizing the proximity blast zones. The stealth targeting trajectories were relayed by an independent crew operating on board a privateer corvette in the Jovian area of operations. After-action intelligence reports revealed shadow elements operating in the highest levels of both Earth and Martian governments were responsible for covert programs and operations that plunged the solar system into a 2.5-year-long conflict and interplanetary war. Multiple UN and MCR officials were implemented in the conspiracy and were forced to step down and or charged with treason. After the Battle of Io and destruction of the proto-molecule stealth missiles, a ceasefire was ordered between the military forces and factions of Earth and Mars. Preceding the discovery of the shadow governments, the UN General Assembly and MCR Parliament finalized a peace treaty officially ending hostilities between Earth and Mars in the UN-MCR Interplanetary War. At the start of the conflict nearly 3 years prior, the United Nations Navy had an active fleet of 3,175 ships. The Mars Congressional Republic Navy was comprised of 635 vessels. In August 2352, the MCRN fleets had been reduced to 350 active naval vessels, with 105 lost in action, 98 damaged, and 85 special operation privateer patrol boats destroyed or missing. That is a 32% casualty loss rate over the 32-month-long conflict. The United Nations Navy, consisting of, for the most part, older and less advanced fleets, suffered a considerably higher amount of ships lost. 355 were destroyed or missing in action, 705 were rendered non-mission capable, and over 600 lightly damaged ships were withdrawn from active duty, leaving 1,545 available frontline vessels at war's end, amounting to a catastrophic 48% overall casualty rate. 450 damaged ships have been repaired by the UN's extensive network of shipyards and docks, returning them to service during the ceasefire agreement, thus giving Mars military commanders a sigh of relief, avoiding another 6 months of prolonged battles where Earth could use their economic power base of repairing increasing numbers of damaged ships to bear that would eventually overwhelm Mars' naval production capacity. Through negotiations, Earth and Mars established a joint security force to research and regulate the newly formed Sol Ring network, manifesting itself out of the Eros protomolecule impact crater on Venus, traveling to a stable orbit between Uranus and Neptune. The solar system's merchant and trade fleets also sustained a heavy reduction in transport and supply capacity. Pre-war, logistical ship numbers exceeded that of some 75,000 ships, making the total number of merchant industry losses that of nearly 11,000, reducing the Sol system's combined logistical trade network by 15% to a total merchant fleet of 64,000, drastically affecting humanitarian supplies to the belt and outer planets. Despite privateer and mercenary groups losing some 2,000 armed skiffs and frigates, OPA and Belter factions still have access to a reciprocal number of retrofitted gunships made possible through interplanetary arms manufacturers, giving extreme influence to the post-war Outer Planetary Alliance that now has the capacity to form their own independent naval force, manifesting from Earth and Mars efforts to recruit contract ships as proxy commerce raiders that eventually would play a part in the unintended outcome for the formation of the Free Navy. Over the span of the 4-year-long interplanetary conflict and war, a major Earth population center was destroyed, along with a primary asteroid belt Eros trade station knocked out of orbit and impacting on Venus. Ganymede and Hygeia stations lay in ruins as a result of 3 major combat engagements. The Martian moon of Deimos and Phoebe research station of Saturn were obliterated by planetary nuclear strikes. 4 additional trade stations received collateral damage, with nearly a dozen relay posts either destroyed or disabled. 3 million interplanetary civilians and colonists perished from Earth and Mars, with 1 million more injured or missing. 1.5 million inhabitants of the belt and outer planets were listed as casualties, with some estimates of nearly double that number. Additionally, 291,000 crew and ship personnel from the interplanetary navies and armed forces were lost in action as a result of the most catastrophic loss of life in the past 300 years of the solar system's history. Jinyawashi scoot rasanate, tiki sasake fasho taxed in the Kango pain. For more Expanse content, check out the Earth-Mars Conflict series covering the entire 150-year period of Martian independence through the Cold War interplanetary arms race leading up to the UN-MCR War, and with over 20 episodes of in-depth breakdowns and deep dives into specific events unfolding during all 6 seasons of the Expanse in-universe timeline series, you can watch now by clicking on these playlist links. Peace out!